Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today I've got a very special guest and we're lucky enough to be speaking with Dmitry Buterin, who is Vitalik's dad. He's got such an interesting background. I think there's so much we can learn from him, all about life as well as computer science and Vitalik's journey. So thanks for joining us today, Dmitry. So give us the quick rundown, I guess, of your background. You grew up in Chechnya and Moscow. Things must have been very different.
Yeah. I grew up in what used to be Soviet Union, and part of it called Chechnya. So that's where I grew up and went to school. And at the end of the school, I went to Moscow for university to study computer science. So then I lived in Moscow for 10 years, actually, and then I moved to Canada, where I've been living for another 20 years and had a couple of more kids since Vitalik, who was born when I was living in Moscow.
Okay. So what was it like growing up in communist Russia? You know, as a kid, what were your memories, and sort of what age were you when you realized that things maybe aren't the way that the whole world works? And a lot of people sort of speak about that.
It's hard to explain because you live in the environment which is very restricted, right? And it's hard to get any information which has not been sanctioned, so to say, by the powers. So your access to any information outside of the country is very limited, basically non-existent, right? But I always felt drawn to. I've been curious, and I was always drawn to but what's outside, right? So I had interest in studying languages, so kind of that became a hobby of mine. And kind of through studying languages, then you start reading some stuff in English and in German and this and that, and you realize, and just by reading sentences about other countries and their native language, you realize, oh, the world is different, right? And it's interesting that people talk about communist Russia or communist whatever country, but actually we were taught that we live in a socialist country and the communist bright future is to come sometime in the future. But I would say that basically by my teenage years, it was pretty obvious that all of this was just a big sham.
Yeah.
You know, nobody was really believing into all this propaganda, and the country was very dysfunctional. And everybody was just trying to pretend, and in the meantime, just survive in any way possible.
And do you think you were the exception, or that was very common? I mean, I often wonder about people in North Korea. Do they feel that there's so much more, or because that's all that you know? Do you just think that that's normal and that's the way the whole world is?
Of course, you look at your own experience, and it's hard to imagine how else things could be, right? And we've had so much propaganda about, out there in the West, they have drug users and prostitutes and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And here we are just peaceful people building this bright communist future, right? So, but when you interact with the system on a day-to-day basis, you see how unauthentic it is, right? So then you start questioning that. So eventually you can see, you don't really know what you don't know, but you see that, what they've been telling us is not quite connecting.
Yeah. My favorite movie.
One of their Russian jokes from the time is that the way country works is that we pretend to be working and they pretend to be paying us for that. So.
Yeah, I have heard that. My favorite movie of all time is The Matrix, and I was only in grade 6 in primary school when I saw it. But I think that concept of people just being stuck in this Matrix 9 to 5 and never questioning anything, going to this job where they're not really happy, working for someone else, I think those whole principles are just so relevant in the world we live in today.
Yeah, that happens in any society, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you liked languages. You studied computer science when you moved to Moscow. Was that another language? I know we hear about people that study a lot of languages and their brain works a little bit differently to other people. Was computer science, those ones and zeros, another language to you after studying the others?
No, not really. It's more like, when I was growing up, our house was full of books, and a lot of them they were about math and similar subjects. And then I got interested in cybernetics and electronics, and trying to build some simple electronic devices, and then was studying computers in theory, because kind of getting hold of any kind of computing device was impossible. But I did get a programmable calculator when I was maybe 16, right? So, and that was fascinating. Like, was its 100 bytes of memory, but you could still do stuff with that. Yeah,
fantastic. And do you think that your parents set you on a certain path? And we'll get into Vitalik shortly, but did they want you to do whatever made you happy, or what were your parents like?
Basically, the whole universe designs your path. If you want to start on a very philosophical note, like my parents, they did not have interest in the same things that I did. So like I basically explored on my own, but there were lots of contribution, right, that kind of went into that. Like, for example, my dad taught me to read very early on, and the whole library of books that we had at home, that all influenced me, right? So we always influence our children, and actually more in the ways that we don't realize them in terms of our conscious influence.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And at some point you do start to tread your own path away from your parents. And a lot of people do have to break that set path to become brilliant people, or to do things that are interesting. So you were studying computer science in Moscow. What were your first sort of few jobs, and when did you decide to make the move? Or you had Vitalik first in Russia, and then what led to moving to Canada? Was that opportunities?
Yeah, it was the end of '99, and Russia already went through huge transition, and Yeltsin just stepped down. Putin was just coming into power, and Russia defaulted just a little bit more than a year ago. So there was a bunch of things coming together, and I had this natural curiosity in the world, and I wanted to explore it. And Canada was just easier logistically for a whole bunch of reasons. Yeah.
And was that a bit scary at the time? I mean, we weren't so interconnected. I'm not sure how hard it was even to move out of Russia. What was that like at the time? Did you have a lot of friends that you were saying goodbye to?
I mean, any kind of immigration is hard, much harder than you realize. And mostly it's really about developing your new roots and the new place of living, right? So, but relatively speaking, it was much easier for me because, I already had pretty good English, and we already had our first business going. So we had a little bit of income, and we had some friends in Toronto. So all in all, it was not a huge deal, but nevertheless, it was still a big deal, if you will.
Yeah. One of my favorite books behind me on the shelf there is called The Cold War. It's by America too, so it's all about Russia and the oil, uranium, natural gas, all the resources. So what was, you said the default in around 99 and Putin coming into power. Yeah. What was that like at the time? Were you aware that was happening? And for people that aren't aware, do you want to maybe give them the quick rundown?
Well, the whole transition from being the Soviet Union to being Russia was full of turmoil, right? Because basically the economy fell apart, the monetary system fell apart, huge inflation. People used to live their lives according to how the government told them to live their lives, right? Like, for example, you go to the university, and then at the end of it, the government tells you, now you're going to be working on this enterprise in this city for this long, right? So, and now it's like, oh, the world is different. You have to find a job, and like there was a lot of stuff, right? So it was a huge transition, and it was difficult for most people, and basically pretty much everybody left, lost their life savings, right? And the economy and destroyed, and I mean it was very weak to start with, but then in terms of the whole industry and the manufacturing industry, the food industry, everything was disrupted, right? So it was like I would say decade of huge turmoil in Russia.
Yeah. And we see that a lot in other nations, the Venezuelas and Argentinas of the world, that are very resource rich, but their economy is really struggling and they're going through hyperinflation. So what are your beliefs that are the best way to run a nation? And I know it's a massive question, but why do we see so many problems in these nations that are resource rich?
I'm not sure I'm getting your question. Why, maybe restate it.
Yeah, it's these countries that should have a lot of wealth and they should have enough to go around, but instead they're experiencing hyperinflation and valueless currencies. They can't even have enough money for food, where they have oil, a precious resource that's worth a lot of money.
Right. I mean, the universe basically, look at evolution. It's all about experimentation, and this is also how I think about nations, right? The universe experiments. Okay, let's kind of try this configuration. Let's try this configuration, right? And in some ways, Russia is similar to some countries. In some ways, it's very different, right? It is rich in mineral resources, which has been its saving grace, but also its downfall, because they didn't have to. They could just rely on that end of the day, and they didn't rebuild the manufacturing capabilities. So the economy is very much still hinging on the oil and natural resources, and now because of that they having lots of problems, right? But this is just one of their big shifts, in their Russia and Soviet Union, because kind of looking back. What happened to Russia 100 years ago, what happened to Russia under Stalin, all of that, contributes to to what happens to what kind of people you have, what kind of economy, what kind of philosophy, and so on, right? Because basically, it's pretty obvious to any reasonable person, analyzing the situation in Russia, that basically in Russia now their power belongs to a bunch of kleptocrats, and they steal in the bulk of their money from, generated from those resources, and the rest of the country is left with peanuts, right?
Yeah.
But if you were if this is where you grew up, right, and your great grandparents were killed in the revolution, and then whatever, many other generations were killed with Lenin and Stalin and who knows what, right? Then you just put your head down and you kind of move on, right? You live your life in a certain way.
Yeah. The way I think about it, it's a little bit like a family situation or individual. It's money and resources and possessions aren't necessarily going to make you happy or successful. And I think at the moment, a lot of people look to America and capitalism as that most successful model. But I think we're going to go through a big change back to things like agriculture, away from so much money in the world of finance. Do you agree with that at all? What do you think are changing in the world at the moment? I think the financial system has just got to change. It's just causing such huge inequality.
I hope it'll change, but I think that the changes will be more subtle and different from what most people expect. The stuff that you have described in terms of their agriculture. I think that the way things are, there are good reasons for that, right? And however fucked up the financial system is, it is that way, not because somebody decided, oh, let's be evil and let's kind of do this on purpose, but it was it's an outcome of so many other things, right? And it's not possible to just say, okay, let's change this, and then you change that, and it's basically, look at the example of the US trying to quote unquote improve lives of people in many other countries, from Iraq to Afghanistan to whatnot. Yeah. All of that is always a disaster, right? Because life is so complex. It's such a huge interconnected system, right? That you cannot redesign it and say, oh, I have this wonderful goal, right? But you have to be a huge systems thinker, right? And that's why also I believe that decentralization has a much better chance of succeeding as a evolving concept, just because it's just I don't know how it will look like, in 5 or 10 years, but it's a viable, evolving ecosystem of things which keeps producing more and more interesting experiments, and things will change. How they will change, I have no fucking clue, right? But they will.
Yeah, I think definitely the decentralization where you're spreading out and giving someone a system and everyone's involved and giving them a better way to do things, it's so much different than saying government is controlling that one specific thing. And the war on drugs is another example, saying we're going to make these substances illegal, and it's just so much bigger than that. It causes so many other problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole question, concept, approach of what people refer to as nanny state. Because for me, it's I always when I look at a particular thought concept, then kind of you have to figure like why are things that way and where exactly do we draw the line, right? If they made drugs illegal because they're bad for you, then it does make sense because alcohol is the worst drug of all, but it's not. It's not illegal. It is legal, right?
Yeah.
But if we make illegal other things which also have a potential for therapeutic use, but then why don't we make illegal cheesecake or chocolate, whatever, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I agree. And having done pharmacy and really seeing how things work from start to finish, it's just the mind really boggles how certain substances are illegal and others aren't. How old were you when you maybe got into meditation? I know you've spoken a lot about psychedelics. Those are things that really change people's path and thought process about the world. Yeah.
I would probably say that I've been curious about meditation for a couple of decades at least, but I seriously really got into meditation maybe in the last 5 years.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
psychedelics before that at all?
It was maybe about 6 years ago when I got into that because I was reading a book by Sam Harris. The title of the book is Waking Up.
Yeah.
And the book is about spirituality, what that is, and how that relates to religion, whatnot. And then he has a chapter on psychedelics, and I've never, been exposed to any stuff like that. So for me, it was a big eye opener. Oh wow, look at this! Like he's talking about quote unquote drugs, and apparently they're not as bad as the media has convinced me they are. So and apparently there are all kinds of interesting and therapeutic uses of those. So that was a big eye opener.
Absolutely as well. And a lot of people start that journey and they end up with ayahuasca. I've got a lot of friends that have done those tours. And I think once you've done that, and my belief is, again, from the pharmacy point of view, that it really opens the mind and makes new connections and pathways and changes your way of thinking forever once you have made those new connections.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, there are many different theories about how psychedelics work in human brains, but the best theory that I've kind of come across in my research is if you've heard of what's called default mode network in the brain, it's basically the system that constantly synchronizing all aspects of our thinking, if you will, so that it all comes together in a coherent picture, which is a very useful function, but then it also over time makes you more and more rigid in your thinking, right? And psychedelics basically seem to disrupt that network, so your mind become much more malleable for a bit of time. And in terms of one outcome of this is you have visual hallucinations because your visual system generates many more theories about what it's seeing. And that aside, but that applies also to your thinking and other aspects of how your brain works. And then your thoughts, instead of being stuck in certain patterns and beliefs, then other ways of looking at things and other beliefs, they become more accessible to you. And within that short period of time, once you access those things, then a new pathway is more accessible to your brain, and then moving forward, then you can access that.
One of the best ways I've heard it described is you can think of your brain like a snowfield, and we have the ski tracks, the ski runs that are well worn. Doing psychedelics is a fresh coat of snow, and the new connections you make between the visual center of your brain, and people say they can see music and whatnot. You're creating those new pathways, and those new ski runs remain there even once the initial effects wear off.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about Vitalik. And I know being a parent is very exciting. Louis, Louis, my son, is 1 year old. You might have heard him crying in the background. I'm not sure, but yeah, what was it like for you? Did you want to be a parent and have a big family? And I guess the early years. At what age did you know Vitalik was a genius? Were you someone that was homeschooling, or what were your thoughts on education and creativity?
Well, first of all, I would say I became a father way too early. But again, that's how the universe designed this, right? And it was very, very difficult at the time, given that both Vitalik's mom and myself were in school together and still working and already working full time. In the meantime, the country is falling apart, huge inflation, like all kinds of stuff is happening, right? So, and that even in ideal conditions, it's not an easy task to support and nurture a child. But in those conditions, it was a huge challenge. But humans are adaptable, and they always adapt, and they overcome whatever their circumstances are. And just look at the humanity right now in the time of their coronavirus, right? Unprecedented, and this whole situation, and still humans have adapted. They are moving on, and they're shifting and evolving. So, and Vitalik, maybe you would want to kind of direct my reply toward a particular area, because there is a lot, obviously, that I can talk about, and there's a lot that I talked about. So I'm not sure what specific areas might be of interest to you.
I guess a lot of geniuses go down a certain path at a very late stage once they graduate and go to university, whereas others are always very ahead in their early years. They're already doing work that's far above their year level. So was he always a genius when he was young?
I guess he was a genius when he was born, but again, it's like any human being, this is pure potential, and that potential gets expressed or not, gets expressed based on the conditions around that particular human being, right? So it was pretty obvious early on that he was a very bright child, and in terms of him learning to read, him learning to count and writing, and then playing with. We gave him an old computer, so he loved playing with that. So there was a lot of indication that obviously he was a very bright, gifted child, and we tried our best to support that between myself, his mom, and her dad especially, who spent a lot of time also kind of looking after Vitalik.
Yeah.
Give me a second, I'll switch on some light.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So I think you're probably a believer that everyone is good at something, and we just need to nurture those things so that they can express those talents and put them in the right environment and give kids the ability to be creative. And maybe the current school system doesn't allow for that so much. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but not quite for the reasons maybe that you suggest. Because for me, I would say that their capabilities in a given human, they will get expressed one way or another, and if the timing is not right, they will get expressed a bit later, and so on. I would say that more children can benefit from more, if you will, emotional support, and and learning many other things than just like pure whatever it is, science, math, whatever. And I think that the current school system is really weak at dealing with their human side of things and supporting this, evolving mystery of being a human versus just like, okay, here's a pupil and let's shove some, information and data into this pupil, and then this pupil can pass some tests, right? So
yeah,
this is what we have, and even with the system that we have, we are somehow evolving, moving forward, and the system will keep changing, right? So this is how humanity works.
Yes. It almost sounds like students are computers in that sense, and we're uploading specific programs into them rather than that flexible nature of being a human being. So yeah, I guess the next few years as Vitalik was growing up, his likes and dislikes and your ideals and values, could you see him going down this path of the computer side of things? And did he always want to make the world a better place, or did he have this sort of vision of where he wanted to go or what he wanted to study?
I mean, me growing up being really interested in computers, and all of my life and career ended up being about technology and computers, but more as on an entrepreneurial path around this stuff. So I built a number of high-tech businesses, but I always had my love for computers and technology and whatnot. So as we recognized the talents that Vitalik had, then it was very natural for us to try to feed him stuff about math, and he was going to this extracurricular math tutor who was giving him all kinds of advanced math and whatnot. And then we helped him learn programming, and then Vitalik really got into this, right? So basically, his capabilities and then our own inclinations, they somehow intersected to create what ended up being his background. Yeah, I mean, what would you like me to build on here?
Yeah, I guess, did you talk about Russia and the problems you thought with the world and the way you thought the world could be better? And did Vitalik have that vision of, hey, I see these problems and I think I can fix them? Or was it really once he sort of got to Bitcoin and started tinkering with this idea of decentralization that a lot of the Ethereum ideas, I guess, came to him?
Well, as you know already, I'm sure, but you will see that even more so that, our children, they don't do what we tell them how they should behave, but they just take it in from the environment, right? So I'm sure that Vitalik growing up in an environment, and we had lots of other Russian friends, and he has heard us talking about stuff and, how things were and whatnot. On the other hand, I would say that school probably was an even bigger factor in all of this, right? And growing up in Canada with and especially in schools, typically kind of have people with if you will, leftist inclinations, right? So we had some discussions and debates about different things and unions, right, and whatnot. I would say that like most adults, the matters of, oh, let's make this world better and whatnot, the concepts around that he has really acquired more in the last decade of his life. He's 26 now, right? So maybe, and especially in the last 5 years, I would say, because the way, at least I see it from outside, when he started out with Ethereum, it was more of, let's build this awesome technology because it makes so much sense, and look at all the, all this potential and, all these conceptual ideas and whatnot. And back then, and he mentioned that in some of his interviews, he had very black and white view of the world as well. Oh, banks are bad and evil corporations, whatnot. And he no longer thinks this way. He can see how much, there
are humans in the system.
How many different shades of stuff is there, and you can have this organization with all kinds of people on that, and the organization ends up, going this way. So I would say that he's thinking in terms of how to actually build better institutions and, if you will, quote unquote, improve the humanity. This is more of the last 4 or 5 years in his thinking.
Yeah, there are a lot of humans working in banks that are just doing that job to put food on the table, and they're not part of an evil corporation or anything like that. For those that don't know, Vitalik was working on Bitcoin and colored coins at the time, and they were trying to program in a little bit more to Bitcoin, and it didn't have that functionality. So that's when he started tinkering and working on the concept of Ethereum. And as you say, he put out the white paper or yellow paper. And wanted someone else to build it, or just thought people that were older and wiser than him might build it. But people kept sort of turning to him, didn't they, to be the leader of sorts, almost just like it was his project and they wanted him to lead. Did you see that side of things?
Yes, and that was very unexpected for him, and it was a huge challenge, and lots of pain related to that, but also obviously lots of growth, right? Because and this is also when people ask me about different technologies, right? Because there are so many other wonderful ideas, and it's not like Ethereum is the best technology ever. Obviously, Ethereum was built on top of this and Bitcoin and that, and people will build on top of Ethereum. People will try to keep improving things. This is our nature. This is what we do as humans, right? But when we look at any kind of technological initiative, right, I think that end of the day, it's a reflection, any kind of big project, corporation or whatever. It's a reflection of personal people who were at their foundation of this, right? So I think that his personal thinking and ethics and whatever, they become a very huge attractor point for people who got attracted to Ethereum and have now formed this huge community of thinkers, people who are building really interesting stuff on top of this and trying to come up with inventive ways to involve more people and so on, right? So, technology is one piece, but then, their personality of people at the foundation of the project, and then the whole community around that makes a huge difference to the success of any project, as you know, I'm sure.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts on the bubble? So it was very exciting when the community was small, I remember, and there was very interesting projects. And then 2017 happened, and then there was just overinvestment and a bit of a bubble. I know Vitalik would have been feeling the pressure, and people say, you're trying to get people to invest in Ethereum and ICOs. There's the financial side of things. I know money doesn't really drive him. I think he even tweeted at the time that Ethereum was overvalued. So, yeah, does he ever talk about the financial side of things? I know from the outside looking in, it just looks like that doesn't drive him at all. But did he ever talk about that it is hard, that people sort of come at you and accuse you of certain things, and there's scammers that come into the space to use Ethereum, and he's just got so much of those things going on now, I guess, in his project?
Well, again, it's very natural for people to get attracted to hot, technologies, and especially when technologies, they obviously going to have huge impact on the world, and they are related to money and finances and whatnot. And when you look back at .com boom, right, we also had this huge, hype cycle and then crash. And that's kind of how things happened in the crypto space, right? That a lot of quote unquote wrong kind of people got attracted, and then all kinds of crazy projects happened. And I was looking at them and like, oh my God, like they don't make any sense to me. Like, and people are sending me all those white papers, and I look at them, I'm like, oh my God, like, doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why are you doing this? Like, and when I talk to them, I realize they don't really understand either, but they feel that this is a really hot area. Let's kind of go there and we might make lots of money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that knowing Vitalik the way that I do, I know that he doesn't care about money. Obviously, money is a useful resource, and it can be used for many good things. And I know that, for example, he donated to all kinds of initiatives on research of longevity and machine intelligence and whatnot, and obviously Ethereum itself. But he doesn't need a car. Actually, he doesn't have a driver license, right? He doesn't need a yacht or whatever, right? So he has enough to live on, and that's kind of what he cares. But he cares about the impact that the things that he has helped to create, to bring to this world, what is happening, how is it impacting. So he does feel a lot of responsibility for what is happening with that. And I know that especially when things took much longer for the original Ethereum vision to come to fruition than he hoped, that it was a huge burden for him.
Yeah.
And me, I've been all of my life in technological projects. So for me, it's obvious that, even when the build stage, then projects can take easily 2, 3, 5 times longer than you plan. But given that this is a R&D stage when the technology is unknown and like through many uncertain things, like it's amazing that they were able to do what they actually did, right? But for him, it was a huge, learning curve, and there was a lot of anxiety in him. And I would say that maybe only in the last year he has become much more. I don't know if the word relaxed is the right word, but he's very excited that now so many other people in the Ethereum community who are contributing to research and all those different teams driving different parts of the project, right? He feels very confident about the ongoing success of the project, and he feels very good about the fact that he's no longer, if you will, the critical pin, on whom the whole building is built, but obviously he's still quite important for the community as a spokesperson in many other respects.
Yeah. And for those people that weren't aware, the hope was initially to move to proof of stake as soon as 2016, when we had the 2015 launch, and then we had the DAO, the first smart contract that got hacked, and that set things back. And I completely agree. Vitalik tried to step back maybe a couple of times. I remember there was that fake tweet that he died or something and the price went down. But I think now you can just really see it, that there's so many areas of research that are just going on without him being in charge or directing it now. And it's very almost comforting to hear you say that he feels more relaxed and confident about the project going forward. I think it's just focused. I think they've done all the research now and they know where they need to be and they're just going there.
Yeah, I mean, their current stage of where Ethereum is obviously like all their most difficult theoretical R&D stuff, really crazy math has been done, and they have, really good idea of how to build things. But as you know well, in technological projects, from proof of concept to actual live implementation of that is a pretty long road. But what I'm seeing gives me lots of hope that things are really on track.
So I know you're more of a probably technical person than me, working with computers and studying computer science. But when you look at sharding or ZK snarks, I mean, do you understand a fair bit of these concepts, or even for you, is it math and computer science that's way out of your league?
It is way out of my league. I can understand the concepts, right? So kind of they make sense to me. Like I can understand, okay, conceptually this makes sense, because like many other things, there are analogies in other areas of computer science and software engineering that kind of make sense to what they're building on. But obviously all kinds of specific aspects of this, like, elliptic curves, cryptography, this and this, and especially the zero knowledge stuff, which is a very new area of math that has seen tremendous growth in the last years, especially thanks to Ethereum and also initiatives like Zcash.
Yes.
And this is really exciting stuff, which can give us the public blockchain with perfect privacy for constituents, as well as all kinds of new approaches to scalability. So yeah, I have a vague general idea about those things, but I cannot pretend to have any depth of understanding.
Yeah. I think that's another thing that a lot of people forget, that blockchain is one technology, but that's not the only thing that has made Bitcoin or Ethereum successful. It's really integrating a lot of new concepts from computer science, particularly Ethereum, that's pushing the barriers and incorporating something like the ZK math already onto the main chain. And then we see a big company like Ernst & Young come out and say, here's our suite of tools for privacy. It's using ZK snarks. It's just amazing to see that cutting edge stuff being integrated into Ethereum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a very exciting pipeline of things for Ethereum, right? I don't know if you were tracking that, but some time ago, Vitalik published this roadmap chart of kind of like the next whatever years of Ethereum. And, it's a wonderful graphical representation. And you look at this, you realize, oh my God, there's so much more to do here, right? But you can also see like, okay, but this is now, there is a real implementation path versus just like some theoretical guessing or whatever, speculation.
Just quickly, I mean, You don't have to say, but are you invested in Bitcoin and Ethereum? Did you have a little bit, or Vitalik gives you a little bit? You're not too fussed about investing in that sort of thing. I'm sure he's got enough ETH to look after you as well.
I do hold some Bitcoin and Ether, and I actually got my. It was me who told Vitalik about Bitcoin back in, I think, 2012. And that's kind of when I got my first Bitcoins. And I've lost my first Bitcoins in Mt. Gox.
Yeah.
And I got some Ether at the crowd sale. And basically, I've held that since then and didn't do much.
Yeah.
Because I know that I started trading. And also, when I looked at projects during the ICO boom, I'm looking at them, and a lot of people were coming to me with all kinds of projects. And I looked at them, I'm like, they don't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
So
good decision, I'd say. So I was just going to skip forward to where do you see the world heading, particularly with COVID? There's a lot of concerns around privacy, and do you see the world going back down that path of socialism with governments picking up the bill for everything at the moment? Are you happy with where the world's heading? Or I think I'm getting the vibe that humans will experiment and the world will go whichever way it needs to.
Yeah, this is kind of, if you will, my big realization is that the world is always doing what it can, what it needs to do, right? And even though in the moment those specific aspects of what's happening we might not like, but this is just a viable. I mean, it happened because there were reasons for that, right? Like, whatever was happening, and we might say, oh, we don't like that, but it's still happening, right? So, it doesn't really help us trying to argue with reality. So the way I think about this is that, it does look like we come into some kind of phase change, if you will, from borrowing a term from physics, when a bunch of things are going to shift, and how exactly they will shift, I have no clue, but I'm really excited to, I think that their pandemic situation and the money printing that probably accelerated the path for decentralized financial institutions, because, people are seeing that, oh, wow, if they can simply print money, then, then many other things and the way we do things, they don't make sense. So very many new systems are needed. I think that also, how to describe this? Most importantly, humans evolve, society evolves, and the way we think about the world evolves, right? So you probably have heard about this, that more and more people are waking up, and this is a very loosey-goosey term, but what it really means is that more and more people develop a new perspective of looking at the world, the perspective of like, oh, it's me against the world, so let me try to fight the world and get as much resources as I can, versus a more systemic perspective when you realize that you're part of the world. So you fighting the world and trying to accumulate resources, is suboptimal, so to say, right? So, and actually, more and more people are developing this new way of thinking, so that accelerates, and I think this is going to lead to some big changes. Like, what time frame, I really have no clue, but this is what I'm hearing from many spiritual teachers, from many other people in this space and whatnot. So I'm really excited to kind of watch what's going to unfold in the next few dozen years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people go through school and they get a job and they think that they've got to get a lot of money and get a lot of possessions, and even social media drives that a lot these days. All these kids want to constantly be happy and compare themselves to others, and I think with the world experiencing something bad, it's the same as a human being experiencing bad times. You've got to go through the bad to appreciate the good and have the yin and yang to some degree.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Privacy and civil liberties was the next thing. Are you a big advocate of that? Do you see governments, China coming out with this government central bank currency that's going to monitor everything we do? Cameras everywhere, facial recognition technology. Do you have any thoughts on all that?
Um, I see, like personally, I'm a big privacy advocate, so I think it's a right of every human being to have perfect privacy to whatever they do. Um, and then I also see that yes, it's inevitable that governments will try to enforce all kinds of surveillance and whatnot because this is what people are asking them for. Please take care of us in this many different ways. And the more you want somebody else, the external agent, to take care of you, the more you have to give up of your rights, right? So this will be happening. And again, the world will do all kinds of experiments. Like even look at the pandemic, right? You know, all the different ways different countries are treating their population, treating the situation, and the same is going to happen with their privacy. You know, like look at China. Obviously, given their industrial power and all kinds of technology accessible to them, they build one type of society, and it's quite possible that we will see more experimentation of the same kind happening in other countries. But then also lots of people who don't want that, you know, myself included, right? So then people will it will be ongoing evolution of those competing trends.
Yeah. I think in one, well, even, the North Koreas, the Chinas, the Russias, things like psychedelics and experimentation and creativity, and that's worries me that the West is going down that path, because so much good throughout history has come from, I guess, psychedelics and people going against the narrative and doing things that are maybe illegal or grey areas. So what were the things that psychedelics, just to wrap up, what did they change for you, your perspectives on the world, maybe even the pros and cons of doing them that you found?
I mean, that's a topic for a whole other conversation. You know, there's a lot we can go into that. But I think that used in the right way with a proper therapeutic support and understanding and you know whatnot, they're the best tool available right now to the humankind to help people deal with their mental and emotional well-being issues. And obviously, this is a huge, huge, huge problem. Look at the world. Look at their all the antidepressants. Look at all other ways that people are trying to distract themselves from what's troubling them, right? And from even despite the research being so restricted in the last few decades, but even the research of the last 5, 10 years, it very clearly demonstrates a huge potential of things like magic mushrooms and many other substances in this space that they can have for to help people dealing with depression, with anxiety, with all kinds of other issues, right? So I think that this is there changes happening. As you know, even the United States, they have decriminalized that on a number of city level initiatives. This is going to happen, I think, more, and the same is happening in Canada. So I see this as a very positive way, and this is hopefully will give the humanity much better ways to deal with the mismatch that we have between their human psychology that has evolved, you know, that evolves very slowly, but human society has changed so much in the last couple of thousand years, right? So our psychology is way behind, and that's why we have all those problems that, you know, our mind is just has not been designed to deal with the situation that we currently have. You know, so much change, so much data, you know, the connections, the family. It's like it's a different world, right? So, and as we talked to you before in this conversation, again, if we greatly oversimplify psychedelics, they help people to make their minds more flexible for a bit of time, so they can. It's easier for them to shift gears and acquire new beliefs, and you know, help them deal with their the world that is changing faster and faster.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the whole humans will need to get back in touch with nature more, and even just to change the topic to sustainability. So rather than this constant growth model, whether it's money or resources or business, the economy, just becoming in sync and sustainable with nature. And I completely agree that psychedelics are very powerful tools, and the word drugs gets just, thrown over this entire category of party drugs are very different for people that would experiment and do psychedelics in the right environment for the right reasons. And the research is clear, as you say, for everything from post-traumatic stress disorder, through the full spectrum. I think there's a lot of areas of research, and big pharma can't make money off it too much yet, and that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been a lot of research. But I do think that will change, and we're going to unlock all the things that these substances are good for.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Dmitry, that's been absolutely fantastic. You've been very generous with your time. Is there any final thoughts for people at home that you'd like to leave them with?
I would say the final thought I would like to leave with is that the world is full of diversity, of all kinds of things constantly happening, and things that we can call bad and good. But the thing is, it really depends on our level of perspective, because a particular thing which is can be quote unquote bad and very painful in the moment can lead to wonderful consequences that we have not been able to anticipate at the moment, right? So really, the human mind is very prone to overthinking. So it either goes into the past trying to think, oh, what could I have done differently, or trying to go into the future trying to defend itself. But the more we can find a way to be more in the present and really connect with what's going on right now and what is the best thing I can do right this moment, then the universe will take care of itself, as long as each one of us can take care of each particular moment that we have. So,
yeah. Fantastic place to finish. I'll put the links down to follow Dmitry on his socials. He does post some interesting things from time to time. So thanks so much for joining us, mate, and we'll have to do this again in the future.
Good talking to you, Alex. Take care.
Thanks, guys.